Welcome everyone. I'm Catherine Clarke. I'm a professor at the Institute of Historical Research, University of London, and I lead our Centre for the History of People, Place and Community. So welcome again to session 2 of History Day 2021 from Senate House Library and the IHR, and of course all the other archives and libraries and collections who make this day happen. And this is our interactive session on collecting nature memories. We're really delighted to have you with us. It's going to be an informal, fun, I hope, and also really interesting and stimulating hour to an hour and a half together. So here's our plan for today's session. I'm going to give a short introduction, and then we're going to have lightning presentations from our wonderful panel of speakers who I'll introduce in a moment. And there'll be a little bit of conversation from the panel to get us started thinking about what nature memories are, what they can do, how we might conceptualize those within our collections. And then we'll open conversation to the whole of our virtual room, questions, discussion, but also sharing our own nature memories, whether those are from our archives and collections or personal memories, nature memories and encounters too. There are lots of ways that you can join in with this session. So you will have seen, hopefully, links already to our Nature Memories Padlet, and I think a link will be dropping into the chat about now. That's already a wonderful and rapidly expanding collection of nature memories from collections across the UK and beyond, and individuals. So do add something there if you'd like to. You can share nature memories with that hashtag on Twitter if you're so inclined. Do share and comment in the chat. And of course, when it comes to discussion and sharing nature memories, you're really welcome also to raise your hand using the Zoom function to speak on camera, and that would be great too. So in a moment, we'll hear from our wonderful panel of speakers who are going to get us started thinking about nature memories from a variety of different angles. But first of all, I just kind of wanted to introduce us to this concept of nature memories and the background to this session. So what are nature memories? As I've said, a fantastic place to start is this wonderful Nature Memories Padlet created for History Day, which I'm hoping to share live later in the session. As you can see, it's full of all kinds of treasures from a wide range of libraries, archives and collections, as well as treasured personal memories from individuals too. So thanks so much to everyone who's already shared something. Now, as I said, is a brilliant moment to add something of your own so we can see it as we explore the Padlet content together during the session. So nature memories are where science and nature meet lived personal experience, social and cultural history, local tradition and folklore. Nature memories tell us about people as well as nature, their encounters and connections with nature, and the varied and creative ways they've tried to record and capture the natural world across time. Nature memories, of course, as many of our projects today will illustrate, they can give us a glimpse into how the natural world has changed over time. In the context of present day challenges like ecosystem and biodiversity loss and climate change, nature memories can also be a call to action to protect and care for our environment. I wanted to highlight a couple of pieces that I really enjoyed in the Padlet so far. So here's one of my favourite pieces, images from the nature diary of schoolgirl Winifred Tomlinson, made in 1909, and this was shared by Cumbria Archive Centre in Kendal. And I really love the way that these entries are little glimpses into Winifred's daily life, as well as the natural world around her. So on March the 20th, she writes that it was late in the afternoon and the sun had just set behind the hills and the sky was a lovely pink. The next day, Winifred writes that it was rather misty on the hills, but the sun was shining brightly. I saw 12 little lambs. Some of them were lying down and others running and playing about. And there are present day nature memories too, personal nature memories from individuals, like these reflecting on the way that nature interacts with city environments and people in Hackney, East London during the COVID-19 lockdowns. So we'd really love to see more of your own nature memories on the Padlet. It's really easy to add them. So it could be an item from a collection, could be your own personal memory. As I've said, you can also share on Twitter with the hashtag Nature Memories, or drop into the Zoom chat and we'll try to share some live later in the session. So the inspiration for today's Collecting Nature Memories activity came from a variety of sources, but one was the Victoria County History of England, a project for which I have the privilege of being director. The VCH is an ongoing project founded in 1899, which aims to write the history of every county in England from the very earliest times to the present day. It's active today in local county groups and community hubs right across England, often working with local museums and archives. It's well known for its big red books of county history, as well as today VCH Shorts, and even at the bottom right here, a smartphone app, which I have to say is a great way to explore the history of landscapes and environments around you when you're out and about. But it's not widely known that the early VCH books, mostly published before 1914, each included a substantial natural history section. With maps, tables, and descriptive content written by the top specialists of the time, they're a rich and unique window into the natural environment of counties right across England in the early years of the 20th century. They're a wonderful resource and quite an untapped resource for comparison with today, but they're also full of vivid and colourful nature memories. So here are a few snippets. At the bottom left, we've got an account of the environment of Weardale, County Durham, but narrated very much as a walk through the landscape with the author, kind of accompanied guided walk. Many of the notes, like the one on the bottom right here, are accounts of personal sightings or experiences. The snippet at the top right here illustrates one of my personal favourite features in all the VCH natural history volumes, the account of local bird populations and visitors, which always includes the local names for the birds, and it gives us glimpses into layers of local folklore and tradition. It's slightly obscured by the Zoom column on my screen, but I never knew until I read this VCH volume that an alternative term for the British long-tailed tit in Leicestershire was a mum ruffin, which I think I'm always going to use from now on. I think that's totally fabulous. And then on the top left, you've got this lovely intersection of natural history and an autobiography, really. Walter Garstang, a very eminent professor of marine zoology, is here writing the account for VCH Essex, and he's describing how he's conducted his research from the deck of his personal yacht off the Essex coast. It just paints a wonderful kind of picture of social history as well as the marine biology itself. There are some really intriguing and fascinating stories. Here on the left, you've got an account of badgers in County Durham, linked to a really involved and multi-layered local folktale about a French hermit, as well as an adorable detail that a female badger with a litter of young lived happily in a pen with some local pigs. And another favourite of mine on the right-hand side, the tale of, I'm calling it the ferocious water vole of Leicestershire. The author describes how he was out walking his dogs and happened upon some rat catchers at work by an old hollow willow tree. And he's astonished that the water vole is far more fearless and more aggressive than any of the rats, even biting some of them on the tail. So we're currently in the process of developing some new research building on the VCH natural histories, using them as a resource to compare environments and ecosystems in the early 20th century and today. But as nature memories, they're so much more than scientific records. They really speak of the social and cultural contexts and experiences of the time, and those very personal stories. So we look forward to picking out some more nature memories from the Padlet, and I really hope to hearing some of yours too during this session. But now we're going to hear from our panellists, who are going to introduce nature memories from their own collections and projects in a series of lightning talks. So let's get ready for that. And our first speaker that I'm very pleased to be able to introduce is Nezic from the Armagh Observatory and Planetarium. So I'll hand over to you, Rock. Thanks so much for joining us today. If you'd like to start sharing your screen.
Hello, very happy to be here. Just should be there in just a second. There we go.
Great.
Right, so in this rather short lightning talk, I decided to basically do a case study on one small portion of our collection, which has the most, being our Observatory Planetarium. We think we most have to do with space, not as much as people can experience in their own, but in fact, sometimes space comes down to us, and this is what this is going to showcase here just a little bit. Vavid, well, it's called the Vavid Meteor these days, mostly because it is it was a bright fireball which fell across both Britain and Ireland, seen across the skies of all of the states in the British Isles, and indeed fell near Vavid, close to Limavady, in Northern Ireland, close to Derry, Londonderry. And from the start, from the minute the event happened, the calls have started coming in to our observatory and planetarium of people telling their experiences about seeing this. And indeed, at the bottom here, I'm showcasing just a little bit. Tom Rackham, director of planetarium at the time, in a couple weeks later, already wrote a little paper in which he says, yes, scientific data has been analyzed, but the present account deals with some of the human aspects that cannot pass through the measure of the dispassionate analytical sieve. And some of this is what I also hope to present in just a couple of pages. So most of the things you're about to see are also in the Padlet. So if you can't read it on the slide, that's all fine. I'll just reiterate now: meteorite, meteor, fireball, small piece of rock from the skies, from the solar system, which falls through the Earth's atmosphere. Most of it will burn up in the atmosphere, but very occasionally, if it's a particularly bright piece, some of it will fall on the ground. And this is what has happened here. So in the top left here, we can actually see what the rock looked like once it was discovered. And we still actually have that rock here in the planetarium to see in person. And indeed, when people do see it, they do often, if they're of an age that they would remember that, come and say, oh, wow, I remember when that was flying through the skies. Anyway, here, as I said, we had hundreds of accounts pouring in from the very beginning. These are some of the most spectacular drawings. In fact, the one on the bottom right, I used as the background on the first slide. That's how good it looks. So really, this event, which is kind of a one-off, there hasn't been a meteorite that bright or with something falling from the sky in Northern Ireland since, kind of takes a snapshot of society across the British Isles at the time, of the people who happened to be out on that Friday evening and seeing the sky and what they saw, what they felt about it. And in the letters here, for example, the top left one, the Mary Isabel Marshall, age 7, saw the fireball. Daddy said it came from southwest and it frightened my cat. Just lovely little bit of human interest in there, which you didn't need to know necessarily, but it's very, very good to have that sort of thing. Similarly, in other accounts as well. I just thought this was a very nice one to highlight in here. So hundreds of letters, hundreds of phone calls as well, a lot of which sort of written down in post-note form, which is rather difficult for archiving, but we're doing our best. And indeed, interest from all across the British Isles, from Ireland, from Scotland as well. The middle letter here is from Argyll, when they had seen Patrick Moore's Sky at Night show, where Patrick Moore actually asked if people had seen the meteorite a couple of months previously. This is from July. The meteorite was in April. And they were reporting in saying, yes, we did see it, this is what we saw, and adding everything, their personal experience to this event. And the next slide, I'll have something quite special, which will be sound recording. So we've got some bird song here, which is actually the first ever audio recording of a meteorite, because they say Aileen Brown, as you can read here, was recording bird song most days, and so she was in that evening, 25th of regular to play in that video. There'll be a car coming by soon, and then there'll be a sort of rapport. There we go. So that was first ever recording of a meteorite passing through the atmosphere. Very, lucky that this even happened, because in fact, Miss Eileen Brown was creating her own nature memories of birds at the same time. There's a bit of thrush, I believe, along with the others there. I'm not an expert on birds, but certainly provides a lot of interest for scientists as well, and also just generally. We have plenty of other stories as well. My 5 minutes are basically up. I'll just say one of the reasons I picked this is because this February there was a meteorite that fell in around Buckinghamshire, somewhere in England, and indeed there are surely lots of stories of the people from this year as well who experienced it. I know that the main piece fell in someone's front yard and is now in the Natural History Museum. So there's a lot that can be discussed about that as well.
Rock, that's absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much. Those wonderful kind of intersections between, a big event, that kind of moment, and ordinary lives, people's experiences. That audio recording, I don't know if you saw the reactions in the chat, just amazing. And how fascinating that something that's set out to kind of record one kind of natural history, the bird song, happened to capture something else really special as well. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. Lots that I'm sure we'll come back to. So I'm now going to introduce our second speaker, who is George Adamson from the King's College London Weather Memories Project. George, we're so pleased to have you with us, and I'll hand over to you now. Thank you.
Sorry, I couldn't work out how to unmute myself there, but here I am. And thank you so much for inviting me to speak today. To be honest, I feel like a bit of a fraud because our project doesn't have an archive. Although the memories that we're collecting will be archived. We've had both Cambridgeshire Archives and Essex Archives very interested in what we're doing, and as is the Museum of Cambridge, and we're hoping that this will eventually lead to an exhibition on weather memories in the East of England. Our kind of collections is you. I mean kind of everybody. I'm sitting here in Bedford, which is about as far west as we kind of include within our vague definition of the East of England, and then all the way down to Essex and up to the Wash. And in fact, not just East of England. East of England is for the oral histories we're collecting. We're just in very similar to the Padlet. We are just asking people, soliciting memories. And I'll come to that. And those memories are open to anybody who has lived in England, or in fact ever been to England and remembers what the weather was like when they were there. So what is Weathering Identity? It's a project that kind of came to me on a day in February 2019. It was about the 20th, I think. I don't know if you remember. It was warm. If any of you were in the southeast of England, I was in London at the time, and it was 24 degrees, and it felt very, very strange being 24 degrees in February. And, you know, it is getting warmer, and very warm days in summer, and, you know, very relatively mild days in winter. But having temperature in the 20s in February kind of struck me on quite an emotional level.
George,
that's what you missed earlier, but we can move on from that. I'll tell you where the image comes from in a minute. So it's it got me thinking about why is it that particular weather. We can go back to the previous slide. Thank you. Why is it that particular weather resonated with me in such an emotional way? And it got me to think of normal weather. And what is being lost or would be lost with climate change. In conversation with colleagues, we realized that the weather is something which it's quite personal. It's tied very much to sense of place and identity, and it's tied very much to memory. So we construct in our mind what is normal weather, what is abnormal weather, what is good weather, what is bad weather, and weather fits into the story of our lives. And it's those kind of stories of weather that are what changes, and is, I think, in this country, what is at stake with climate change, more so than the kind of apocalyptic, you know, sea level rise, floods, etc. That we read about, and that maybe are more of an issue in other parts of the world, you know, people that live near glaciers, will be far more affected by that. In this country, I think it's a change to weather. So we started this project to collect people's stories of weather. You can move to the next slide now. And we have we're doing this. There's two parts to this project. One is an oral history where we've been interviewing people from the east of England, and we're really interested in anybody, mostly older people, just because the memories are longer. We also have an online portal which I was hoping I could show you, but of course I'm unable to share my screen. I wonder actually if you click on the take part online whether it will take you to that website.
George, okay. We may be able to check in with that in the discussion.
There we go.
Later on.
There we go. So this is our where we're collecting weather memories, and this is open to anybody in England. And you can see at the moment we're collecting memories of autumn, childhood memories of autumn in England. So that's part of what we're doing, and the other part are these histories. You can go back to the slides now. So if you just move across to the next slide. Oh, you've lost it altogether.
Yeah, so I think the slide's back now, memories of autumn.
Okay, so yes, just a few memories that I picked up. These are from our online portal. Just autumn in particular seems to be a month that really resonates with people. Leaves and the autumnal sunshine. We weren't necessarily asking people for childhood memories, but this was last year. We were just asking for autumn memories, but it seems like there's something quite autumn seems to be quite associated with childhood in quite an interesting way. And I really like the last one because it's from a participant who's not from the UK, he's from Netherlands. I was just talking about one trip to the UK, going to London with mum in late October. Leaves being everywhere, it felt wet all the time, just like at home, but it felt very different. Autumn days when the grass is jeweled. It's amazing how many times that song is going around my head at the moment. But of course with the modern version, which is the smell of pumpkin spice every time you pass to Starbucks, which is if there was a new autumn days, it was going to be about smelling pumpkin spice as I buy my Starbucks, which I find quite amusing. But there we go. This is place and identity, and of course this changes. So you can just move on to the last slide now, which is just a thanks and a note to we have a Twitter handle which is at Weather Memories, which you're welcome to look at and see the kind of stories we're talking about. And just a quick thank my colleagues Jess and Anna, who are the co-leading it with me in the Department of Culture, Media, Creative Industries at King's, Chris, who is in the Department of Neuroimaging, Ines, who's an artist who amongst many other things provided all these lovely images I've shown you, Taylor and Lauren at the bottom, who are our postdocs, Rib, who is supporting us from the Oral History Society, and the Museum of Cambridge. Thank you. Sorry that it took longer than I would have hoped.
Not a problem, George. Thank you so much for pressing on valiantly there, and to Gemma for helping out with the slides as well. What a wonderful project, and really fascinating when we're looking at archives and collections that have been around for a very long time, to look at the creation of an archive, the formation of that. Really exciting to see that. And of course I urge everyone to get involved and contribute and share your weather memories with the project. It's great to see the comments and reactions in the chat. Thanks everyone, please, for keeping the chat supportive and respectful. We appreciate that. Thank you. I'm now going to hand over to our next speaker. We're really pleased to have with us Maxwell Ayamba from the University of Nottingham. Maxwell is a journalist. He's a founder of the Sheffield Environmental Movement. We're really looking forward to hearing from you, Maxwell, so over to you.
Yeah, so my talk today is about ontological blackness, which is about the Black life experience in the UK rural countryside. And I'm using the 100 Black Men Walk for Health, which inspired the play called Black Men Walking by the Eclipse and Royal Theatre production in 2018 and 2019. So I would like to begin my talk today with this quote from Marcus Garvey. Quote, "A people without the knowledge of their past history, origin, and culture is like a tree without roots." In fact, Garvey employs this quote as a summation of how the struggle by Black people to reframe narratives of their history and culture has been erased due to a history of enslavement, empire, imperialism, and colonialism. It is a quote that provides a valuable lesson to educate ourselves and examine how the failure to engage in honest discussions of our past histories has led to a wrong notion of racism, especially in the rural countryside. In fact, the name 100 Black Men Walking is quite historical. Set up by myself and my two African Caribbean friends in 2004, it took its name from the historic civil rights movement, a Million Man March in the US in 1995, where in Washington, DC, featured speeches by Black civil rights leaders such as Martin Luther King Jr., Rosa Parks, Maya Angelou, Reverend Benjamin Chavez, and Reverend Al Sharpton, advocating for racial justice and equal rights. 100 Black Men Walking to some extent can be regarded ideologically apolitical, as is synonymous to the struggle of the civil rights movement. In this case, it tries to reframe narratives of the British countryside as a white rural space. It's about making the point of how race and racial power are constructed and played out in the British society, especially within the rural countryside space. Nonetheless, the real ethos behind setting up the group was for middle-aged Black men who are normally very active in their prime to have the freedom to roam the rural countryside space for their physical and mental well-being, which led to the motto of the group, Walk and Talk. We view the countryside as providing a safe space where Black men can walk freely with their peers and share their lived experiences of stories without being judged, which has been good for their physical, psychological, emotional well-being. In fact, in Britain, the only spaces where Black men walk or meet often tend to be the barber shops, where these are the spaces that they feel they are confined and regarded as safe spaces. So if you read Henri Lefebvre's critical theory on the production of space, written between 1968 and 1974, he describes how the notion of space accepts and yet prohibits others. He noted how a space can be circumscribed, both in social space, physical borders, and conceptual boundaries that are socially produced, and these spaces can either be threatening or welcoming. Taking into account Lefebvre's theory of space, the question I would like us to reflect on is, why should Black men walking in the rural countryside space be something of a novel to white people walking in that space? Can you move on to the next slide, please? So the Black Men Walking play, as you can see, produced by Eclipse and Royal Theatre production in 2018-2019, and written by the poet and rapper Testament, as Nick Hayes in the book of Trespass, Crossing the Lines That Divide Us in 2020 noted, is an indication that the English descendants of Black Africans, immigrants, are finally claiming their place at the table by trying to link their stories to the landscape. The Black Men Walking play was quite exceptional, as most Black British plays tend to explicitly represent Black mental health, women, and other Black struggles in the British society. However, this play took another angle. It was set against the backdrop of deftly exploring the breadth of the Black experience in Britain in a rural countryside setting. The play challenges misconceptions about race and racism, and there's no shying away from the abuse formerly aimed at Black people in Britain, from calls of "where are you from?" and "go back to where you came from," to the use of racial slurs and the microaggressions Black people live with. The play tackles these subjects head-on, watched largely by a white audience in theaters across the country, which led to some feeling more than a little uncomfortable. For example, Black people are often asked the question, how long do we need to be here to belong or consider as British? It's an unwelcome but poignant reminder that this play is so important in that it forces some white people to challenge what they don't know about the history of Black people in Britain, which started centuries ago with the first Black Roman Empire, Septus Severus, and now with the arrival of the Windrush generation, Black Men Walking, therefore, is a story about the past, but also a tale of contemporary racism, a history that has been long forgotten. These characters were real people, yet they have been clear from the narrative. As one of the characters put it, though we are written into the landscape, you don't see us. We walked England before the English. These characters telling contemporary stereotypes of Black people. The ivory bangle lady and Septimus Severus illustrate that not all Africans were enslaved. These were wealthy people with power and authority, as they weren't alone. The play also featured John Moore, a Yorkshire businessman, and Pablo Franque, Black Victorian showman, who served his production to 19th century audiences for 3 decades. In telling these stories, the play passionately questioned the cliché of Black Britain today, making the point that most stories of Black Britons have nothing to do with gangs or drugs, but deal with the ordinary folk doing ordinary things. Unfortunately, many Britons still believe that the presence of Black people in these islands began in 1948 with the arrival of the hundreds of men and women from the Caribbean on a ship called the Emperor Windrush at Tilbury Docks. This erasure of hundreds of years of Black history continues to feed contemporary rural racism. The British countryside is often perceived as a white landscape, predominantly inhabited by white people. Long-established links between royalty and racial purity are at the core of British national identity. The fact that majority of Black people live in the urban areas is used to justify these narratives. It is time to rewrite these narratives and put our ancestors back into the history of the British countryside. We need to acknowledge that there were Black Romans and Black Jews, but there were Black soldiers in the Second and First World War who fought and died alongside their white British counterparts in the countryside. Our stately homes are filled with the hidden stories of British imperial past, with the suffering of Black people obscured by opulent furnishings and grand old gardens. Onyeka in his book, if you read his book, 2018, Blackamoors, Africans in Tudor England, their presence and status and origins, found evidence of Africans in cities, towns, and the rural countryside. Much work remains to uncover the presence of Black people as histories of their presence has been erased. Nonetheless, the parish councils and churches do have the records of their registers of Black people as servants and slaves, either baptized or buried on the church grounds. Hopefully, the ongoing digitization and publication of historical parish registers across the UK will help to uncover the Black presence. However, as Onyeka argues in time of the Blackamoors, Africa did not automatically occupy the lowest position in Tudor society. Onyeka also posits that Africans in Tudor England were not all slaves or transient immigrants who were considered as dangerous strangers victimizing otherness. In addition, Blackamoors, as he reveals, is evidence of some Africans in England having important occupations in Tudor society, employed by powerful people because of the skills they possess. Onyeka explains how Africans use these skills in Tudor England, with most of these people being social and economically useful in that society. Next slide, please. I'm almost finished. Next slide. So you could see this. You might have seen this image, which raises a whole lot of problems during the National Trust publication. So the past about the presence of Black people in Britain and the historical role they occupied, as you can see from Corinne Fowler's book, which just appeared on the slide. Although existing body of literatures into the stories of British historical past depict episodes of shame and pride. For example, if you read Corinne Fowler's Green Unpleasant Land in 2020, nonetheless, these stories need to be told. Post-colonial literature suggests that even those parts of British history that are looked upon as being great are often seen as colonial legacies that discourages slavery, empire, and imperialism. I would like, therefore, to argue that understanding from the different perspectives and contested events in history is central to understanding the past. Next slide, please. And I'm linking this to, the mass trespass in 1932, Ben Rothman and his compatriots who advocated or fought for access to the mosque and the hills, to Rome. And so Black people accessing those spaces now is beginning to have a kind of a national debate. And then if you go to the next image, please, next slide. So these are some members of the Black Men Working Group, which is now called Work for Health. Abel Nevis. Next slide, please, because of time. Continue. That's another slide. Yeah. Well, this slide is important because we now have emerging racialized working groups. You might have heard Black Girls Hike. And then on the left side, you've seen the lady from Bolton with the Becca. So all these groups are emerging because our working group managed to set the scene in terms of making the countryside more accessible to minoritized groups. Next slide, please. So these are just pictures about our working groups up Scafell, and then Mantor and all over the place, just to give you a flavor about the work we've been doing in the countryside. Next slide, please. Yeah, and then basically that's it because of time. So if there are any comments, they're most welcome.
Thank you so much, Maxwell. You took us through so much there. What a kind of a wide range of context, as well as the specific project that you're working on. And I think those links between the natural world and nature memories and well-being and activism are probably things that we'll come back to in our discussion, but particularly so interesting in terms of the insights you've given us into strategies to promote diverse and inclusive participation in the countryside, and highlighting, of course, those traces of racism and empire found throughout our landscapes and environments, as you say, particularly highlighted in that recent work on country houses and estates by Corinne Fowler and others. Thank you so much. Well, we were hoping to have another speaker with us today. That was Richard Yates of the Essex Wildlife Trust. Unfortunately, he's not been able to make it today. But we do have with us Chris Corbett, who's Community Engagement Officer with Teesside Archives. And I know that they've been collaborating, amongst lots of other exciting things, collaborating in a fascinating project with the Tees Valley Wildlife Trust called Where the Wild Things Are, which is really absolutely centred on nature memories. And Chris, it would be lovely to be able to reach out to you and bring you in here, actually. I wondered if you could say a little bit about that project, or perhaps more broadly, how nature memories resonate for you in your Teesside collections or in your own personal experiences.
Yeah, I will. Thank you very much for getting me involved in this today. Yeah, Where the Wild Things Were. This was an oral history programme, and it was a 2-year project that was coordinated, like you say, by Tees Valley Wildlife Trust. And it came about because Kate Bartram, the officer who still works for the trust, she was involved in another project, and she was listening to people's stories and memories of their childhoods. And she realised that these were people of a generation who were possibly the last generation to experience a truly what you could call free-range childhood, where they basically went out in the morning with a bottle of pop and a bait box with a sandwich in, and they didn't come home until tea time or until it got dark. And they just interacted with their environment in a way that I think modern day children probably don't get the opportunity to anymore. And so she thought there was a really important memories to keep, because they actually hold some quite important information about species distributions, animals that and plants that were common, aren't as common now, or ones that weren't common then but have actually come back. So they got some money from the National Lottery Heritage Fund, and they worked quite closely with our previous archivist, Kimberly Starkey, at the archives, Teesside Archives. They were embedded into it just to make sure the material that they collected was appropriate and could be stored. And we hold a digital archive resulting from that. So it was looking at people that lived in East Cleveland. And for those that don't know the area, East Cleveland is the part of the country, I guess it's got the North York Moors to the south, it's got the Teesside, Teesmouth estuary to the north, and we're bounded by Gisborne to the west, it's probably the most westerly town, and the coastline, which has Saltburn, Skinning Grove and Staithes. They were gathering people's early recollections of wildlife and how they got connected, what actually sparked off that interest. And a lot of different things, memories, memory walks and interviews and things like that. And some of the things that they found out, which I found particularly interesting because I'm an amateur naturalist myself, they talked about water voles, which are one of the fastest declining mammal species in the country, and how virtually every single river or beck in East Cleveland had a really healthy population of water voles. They were so numerous, the banks were peppered with their burrow holes. People would shoot them, which obviously you can't do now, or they'd hunt them with dogs. They were so numerous. In fact, one lady recalled that she found a dead one when she was a child, and she was so taken with its beauty. She thought it was so beautiful, she actually brought it home. I do hope she didn't forget about it and leave it under a bed or somewhere like that in a shoebox. But obviously now water voles have disappeared from all these becks in East Cleveland. In fact, the only populations that we have are ironically in the urban beck system. In Middlesbrough's got a particularly good population. Red squirrels as well, they were in all of the deciduous woodlands. East Cleveland's got some wonderful ancient woodlands, and the red squirrels were prolific there. Obviously the greys moved in, outcompeted them, introduced squirrel pox, and the red squirrels disappeared. And now they're more closely associated with pine forests, because they have a little bit of a competitive advantage over the grey squirrels. And they talk about the sort of the locations, they give very specific details about where they found these animals and the different plants. The dates are a little bit hazy, I have to say, because I can't remember, what I had for my tea last night, so I don't blame them for not remembering exactly when they saw things. But they also talked about where they learned, where they got that connection, that love of nature from. And a lot of them was just from the fact they'd go out with their parents or from their wider family. An uncle who would take a real interest in their interest in natural history and teach them all the different names. And getting back to that, the thing you said about long-tailed tits and their alternative names, they did make the point that they were given local names for some of the plants and animals, and it wasn't until they were a bit older that they actually discovered the proper names, as it were, like the bum barrel for the long-tailed tits and things like that. They also talk about coming into contact with nature through their school as well, and through the nature table, which I'm a huge advocate of bringing back. I think some schools do have it, but I really think every school should be made to have a nature table. And there was a lovely little scheme that somebody talked about called First Find System. And it was very clever. It introduced a competitive edge into this. And basically you could earn a star if you brought in something for the first time. So if you found the first primrose before anybody else, you get yourself a star. So it kind of fits in a little bit actually with my dad's archive that I'll talk a little bit about later. So yeah, I mean, there are things, there are negatives. We've got fewer yellow hammers, we've got fewer corn buntings. They're a species of bird that's declined across the board as farming practices have changed. Once over, they were really, really common in East Cleveland, and thrushes have declined as well. But they've also talked about, they see deer more commonly now. They were quite rare. These are people who were born late 1930s, 1940s, 1950s, and nowadays deer, their populations proliferated, but back in the day, they weren't noted that much at all. So it's a really, really lovely collection. We do hope to do more with it, and I know it's a fairly recent collection, but it is talking about memories from quite a while ago. And there's some wonderful stories that we're really, really keen to share and kind of link with other collections that we have within the Teesside archives.
Oh, thank you so much, Chris, for giving us an insight into that project. It sounds absolutely wonderful. And as you say, so much kind of change both in the natural world, but also social change just during that period that you've been looking at within those lifetimes. I've dropped a link to the project into the chat for people. And I love the way that some of the different memories that you were reflecting on there have linked together lots of different things we've already been talking about, from water voles and bird names through to, I noticed Catherine Sidwell Kingston talking about nature tables in the chat earlier on. So lots of synergies, lots of things coming together here. Thanks so much. So I think what we're going to do in a moment is invite anyone who'd like to in the room to share your own nature memories with us. You might be representing a collection, you might have something you want to share from an archive, a collection, a project. You might have a personal nature memory that you'd like to share with us. You can drop into the chat, or if you have something you'd like to share on camera, you're happy to speak on camera, you can raise your hand using the Zoom function and we'll endeavour to come to you. We might also make some time to look at the Padlet together and pick out some highlights. But just before we do that, while you're all thinking about what you'd like to share, I'd just like to come back to our speakers, really. And there are lots of questions I'd like to ask, and there might be time for more conversation later in the session, but really just one to get us started. So I'm thinking about that question, I suppose, of what that idea of nature memories adds to the purely scientific, what it enables us to do that's simply thinking about natural sciences, doesn't allow us to do. And I noted down that wonderful quote, Rock, that you shared with us from T.W. Rackham about the human aspects that cannot pass through the mesh of the dispassionate analytical sieve, which I absolutely love. And I think a couple of you've touched already on things that nature memories might be able to help us do in the present, what they might enable, what they might spark or facilitate. Chris, you know, with your Wildlife Trust collaboration, there's a kind of conservation dynamic to that, I guess. Maxwell, you pointed very powerfully towards social activism and thinking about well-being. I wonder if any of our speakers can reflect on what you think your concept of nature memories in your project is enabling us to do in the present, or adding to a purely scientific engagement with weather or pantry, you know, observatory science in the past, and astronomy in the past. George, over to you.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple of things we'd like to do with our project. One I alluded to earlier, which is climate change. Climate change it tends to be approached either through science, which is, you know, it's very kind of averaged and abstracted. It's very difficult to kind of comprehend what 1.5 degree rise globally really means, because we don't inhabit a global climate. You know, we inhabit different spaces within that climate, which is our own kind of weather. And particularly for a country like the UK or England, which is my particular focus, the kind of apocalyptic narratives often don't really resonate. I mean, flooding, you know, we're probably not threatened in the same way as some other places are. I mean, you know, we're not on an ice margin, for example, where climate change is far more kind of apparent. Yet things will change, and they will. I remember in the 90s when I was a teenager, people were talking about, won't climate change be wonderful? We're going to have the climate of Nice, and everyone's like, ha ha, isn't it? You know, we'll have. But actually, you know, we would survive with the climate quite well, but it would be totally different. And not just because our built environment is not designed to that, and our agriculture is not designed to that. The whole culture of this country, of this place, is not built to that kind of climate. So that's one thing that it can bring. Another thing I'm interested in is this question of identity, and that's one reason why I'm interested in Englishness rather than it's question which is, you know, coming to the fore quite a lot at the moment, and often in quite, you know, it brings up a lot of quite difficult questions, and I find kind of approaching it through the weather it's kind of a nice entry point to some of these other questions. Maxwell, I really enjoyed your presentation, and while you were talking, I had a look through our people who have uploaded to our portal. We have 97 people uploading, and every single one of them is identified as white British, which is, it's quite kind of, you know, terrifying and very disappointing for the, you know, the networks that we're sharing this in. Because one thing we want to be very clear is that there isn't, there's no homogenous Englishness. There's no homogenous way of understanding the environment that people live in this country. And we want to, we want a broad patchwork of stories rather than to try and narrow it down to an individual story.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, George. And yeah, and that issue of identity is coming through really strongly in several of your presentations, of course. And I'm really interested in what you're saying about how that identity and personal experience connects with the big issues like climate change. And I know that one of the phrases that the Wildlife Trust use is nature connectedness, isn't it? That idea of the connection between the lived, embodied personal experience and what's going on out there at a bigger scale, which I guess nature memories kind of focalize in many ways. Maxwell, can I hand over to you? Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Catherine. I think that was a very brilliant question you posed. I mean, we are living in the times of the Anthropocene, and climate change really has impact on all of us. But I think, historically, I mean, the conservation movement in the UK has always been, mostly within a Green Insiders Club led by middle-class white people. which has excluded and marginalized a lot of, minoritized groups. And the work I do at the Sheffield Environmental Movement, which I founded in 2016, is to ensure that everyone plays a role in making the world a better place. As an ecocentrist, I believe man is part of nature, and nature shall we return. And so when we talk about biodiversity, we have to talk about human diversity. And so we have to respond for all our actions. It doesn't matter the color of your skin or your racial background. But where we have a situation where environment become a privileged, space or profession, then we have a big problem here. And that's the more reason why it's creating a lot of the issues we are talking about here, where you look at the environmental sector to be the second least diverse sector in the UK, only second to farming. And so in this situation, we are, all in this together. I mean, the COVID impacted heavily or disproportionately on Black and minority communities. So we have to work together because we share shared space. And by working together, we can make the world a better place. And so that's why if you go back to Agenda 21, it's an act locally, think globally. At the end of the day, the crisis we are facing as humanity has no respect. It's no respect of race. We are all in this together. So it's a question of how we reach out to everyone in this world and, get them on board. I mean, the COP26 as is going on now, I don't know whether they'll come out with anything better or not, but at the end of the day, when natural disaster strikes, it's not going to say you are white or you are black or you are green or you are blue. Everyone's going to be affected. So it's how we can all work together in a joined up way to address the issues that are facing humanity as a whole. I think that is the starting point going forward.
Thank you so much, Maxwell. It's really, really powerful. There is that very strong kind of, activist imperative here, isn't there? And I can see lots of people sharing links in the chat to coverage of Maxwell's really important work and projects. So do follow those and explore them. I can see that Victoria and Vivi have both got your hands up. Can I ask you, are you wanting to come in on this discussion, or are you looking to share a nature memory of your own?
Mine
Victoria?
is both, actually.
Okay, over to you then, Victoria.
Hi, everyone, and hello, Catherine. The reason I asked to speak was because my memory could not go on the Padlet. My memory is a sound, and it's the sound of my favorite beach in Greece, where I've been swimming over the past 50 odd years. What I've done with that sound is I have recorded it on my telephone, and every time it rings, the sound I get is the sound of my beach, which is very soothing and evocative. And it really makes all the difference, no matter who the person at the other end is. For me, it's my beach, it's my retreat, it's my personal paradise. Now, the other thing I have to show you from that beach is this, this shell, which appeared on my birthday some 20 years ago, and I collected it. And then on another birthday, another shell appeared. So it's all here. And then a little stone in the form of a heart. Now, what Maxwell said resonates with me and really forms part of my beach agenda. Now, this is a tiny little beach on a Cycladic island in the middle of the Aegean. I've been going there, as I said, for many, many, many years. Over the past 3 years, we have been experiencing changes that are extraordinary. The tide coming in and going out, the winds, the sea urchins, and this year, the jellyfish. We have had jellyfish all over the Aegean, which normally used to come in if there was a south wind. Now they're there all the time. Climate change has reached the Aegean, and the Aegean is a sea that is many thousand years old, and the civilization there is very, but anyway, I don't want to take up any more of the time. I just wanted to place on the Padlet the sound of my favorite beach, and perhaps this is something people can take away with them and emulate or use in the future. Thank you very much.
That's wonderful, Victoria. And I love the way that we've got these kind of multimedia elements in some of the archives that we've been reflecting on, the wonderful audio we heard from Rock, but then people can add multimedia into the archive as well. And I think that example you've given us really resonates with what we just heard from Maxwell, doesn't it? About and from George as well, about how these big global challenges, actually they're all local and they're all individual and personal. We experience those on a very personal level, you know, and they align with our own nature memories. That's wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. Vivi, I love the way this is just kind of opening out organically, which is just what we wanted from this session. Vivi, did you want to comment on the panel conversation, ask the panel a question, or share a nature memory? You're in nature. That's wonderful.
I'm in nature. Yeah, I'm outside. I hope it doesn't start raining again, but if it does, that's okay. Yeah, I've been so inspired by all of the talks this afternoon, and as I was walking through Peckham Rye Park, I actually had a memory of a very, very different landscape. I'm now doing a PhD at Royal Holloway and Kew Gardens, and it's building on work that I started in the far north of Sweden with the Sami people, who are probably best known for reindeer herding. And so this memory is from September, when sort of 90 kilometers within the Arctic Circle, it should be quite cold and well into autumn. But when I was there in 2014, it had been a very, very dry summer. And in September, the temperatures were still very high. And the ground was so dry that when it came time to gather the reindeer herds together and mark the new calves and slaughter some of the males, which is what typically happens in the autumn, the hooves of 5,000 reindeer that were gathered in this outdoor corral created these massive clouds of dust. And reindeer and herders alike in this corral were coughing. So the sound of the reindeers coughing and the humans coughing in this vast and very dry landscape really struck me. And it was unbearable. No one could do anything, and the animals were distressed, and the humans were distressed. And actually, in the end, a decision was taken to water bomb the landscape. So these helicopters started flying in and dropping water, and so that vision of the sound of the choppers coming over, and then the sound of the water kind of splashing and the dust dying down was another sort of very sensory experience. And just to bring it to a close, I think someone mentioned before that kind of very personal experience of these rather distant and large global phenomena. I think that personal connection, and often the sort of embodied connection to these experiences, is what really brings the message home, and you know, hopefully incites us to do something and
absolutely
contribute in some way.
Thank you so much for sharing that memory, Vivi. That really illustrates that really beautifully. And as you say, really interesting, isn't it, how lots of us are sharing quite multi-sensory memories. And I suppose thinking about the kind of archives that we might be building now, sharing our memories, we have so much more scope, don't we, to share and to record and to archive the multimedia than some of those older collections that we're looking back to. What I'm going to suggest is that, because it's lovely being in the room together and seeing everyone's faces, I'm not going to share the Padlet at the moment, but you might want to open the Padlet on another window alongside Zoom, so you can look in and out perhaps at things that people are referring to. I can see that Nicholas and Roger both have your hands raised, but I can also see that Rock, you do. And as one of the panelists, I don't know if you want to come back in on anything that's been raised so far. So can I invite you back into the discussion, Rock, first?
Oh, okay. Sorry, Nicholas, then yes, I guess you'll be after me. I do want to, yes, kind of go back into what we've been talking about for the last several people, but from starting with George there, yes, but I do feel that sort of nature memories has the as a concept, this power to, especially, yes, it's COP26 right now, and also here at our Observatory, we've been taking weather readings since 1794, which is a long time. So yes, we are quite close to all that working. But anyway, I feel it's very important to get people to have the personal experiences, to actually stop and recognize them, to see how things around them might be changing as well, not just, yes, oh, hear about more fires in Australia, that's literally the other side of the world, or things like that. That, yes, which is sort of work that, yes, everyone's been talking about. So yes, mentioning, oh, I remember that thing, that was unusual, that is not what normally happens. Now these sorts of things are happening more often. And so this brings the connectedness between the people and the environment a bit closer, and hopefully is a better catalyst then for change coming onwards.
That's really interesting, Rourke, and maybe how articulating it as a nature memory is a way of kind of encouraging us to kind of be more conscious and more reflective about those moments that are, as everyone is showing, so much as part of everyday life and experience. But it's a way of calling our attention to them in new ways. Thank you. So thank you for your patience, Nicholas. We'll come to you. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. I have enjoyed the conversations, but I think my sense of the discussion is that, in a way, a reflection perhaps of the incoherence of what nature actually is or what it means. You probably know that Raymond Williams, the great sociologist, described nature as the most confusing term in the English language. Nobody can actually really come to an agreement about what the hell the term means. And it's interesting when the kind of range of presentations here look at a whole disparate array of different references, terms of reference. And I, as an architectural historian, one of the things that interests me, I guess, is looking at this kind of in a broader historical reach. We think of pre-modern cultures, how they would have understood nature in ways that are just fundamentally different from ours. In the modern immanent world, everything presumes the notion of nature as kind of grounded. That's the basis of the biosphere. And when we talk about meteorites as being part of nature, we're really confronting problems. What in the hell does it mean? And it's particularly interesting. I think Rock's presentation is interesting because there's an argument, I guess, to suggest that meteorite only becomes nature when it hits the Earth. If you really think about that for a minute, when it doesn't hit the Earth, it bypasses the Earth. It's in another kind of realm. It's not the natural world. It would have been understood as the natural world in a pre-modern context because, of course, the celestial realm was the one that actually determined and underpinned everything that is mortal and human. In the modern kind of immanent world, we're living in a different kind of understanding of what nature actually is. It's a kind of limited dimensional understanding of nature, which is essentially this kind of horizontal sphere of a kind of veil, if you like, of our atmosphere that contains us and sustains us. And it's a very limited dimension, but one that actually provides the basis of most science. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And the scientific understanding of nature, in a way, has probably contributed to that kind of limitation of what nature actually is. So here lies one of the biggest challenges I think we face as individuals, as society. And in a way, this idea that, is a galaxy, millions of light years away, part of my nature? Is it my nature? Is it our nature? Does it have a bearing on our survival, on our existence? And is this meteorite, wherever it comes from, actually something that we could comfortably hold in our hands and say, yes, it's part of the natural world? I think that's a real problem.
That's fascinating, Nicholas, and a real kind of provocation for us, I think, as part of this conversation. And I think, I'm a medievalist, and certainly appreciate the way you're calling attention to how our notions of nature have changed historically, and perhaps we could almost say kind of expanded and contracted historically, and perhaps the chronological ambit of some of the collections and archives that we've been focusing on so far have had a role in kind of defining how we're talking about nature. I have to say, Raymond Williams is a really interesting connection, and I was struck by how, you know, Williams' manifesto, the kind of culture is ordinary, that manifesto for the right to participation and engagement, for me, that's really resonating with what you've been talking about, Maxwell, and you know, the kind of the importance that our natural environments are not restricted and elite and exclusive, but that we all have the right to kind of to participation in those. Maxwell, did you want to come back in on that, on any of this briefly?
I just wanted to comment quickly on Nicholas' point about nature, because to me, I believe, you know, mankind is part of nature, because, you know, everything literally in this world is part of nature. But I think the problem with humanity is when we talk of nature, we tend to exclude ourselves from nature because we think we've got the scientific knowledge to manipulate nature or control nature. And that is why we're in the crisis we are in now. Not until man understands that he's part of nature, we will continue to have the problems that we are facing. I don't think science can fix everything. The only thing that can fix everything is us agreeing that we are part of nature, and we have to learn to live with nature than try to control nature. That's the way I see it, whether through science or whatever it is.
Mm-hmm. Mm. Thank you, Maxwell. Thank you. I'm going to turn to Roger in just a moment. Just an invitation to everyone, you're very welcome to share a nature memory, or if there's anyone who has enjoyed something they've discovered in the Padlet and you'd like to share that with the rest of us and just kind of call attention to that, we'd love to hear about that as well. But Roger, thank you for your patience, and please do join the discussion.
Well, thank you. Yes, I'm not being patient. I'm just thoroughly enjoying myself. Just to relate to a point that Nicholas made, and boy, there were a whole lot of things there. I want to record an observation not made by me, but made by somebody rather a long time ago, the painter Giotto. That Giotto, as we understand it, used to tend his father's sheep. And at night he would do this, and of course there wasn't a lot to see, but he would look at the night sky. Now, if you go to the Scrovegni chapel in Padua, there are a series of Giotto frescoes, and those frescoes feature angels, and the angels have robes that then end in flame. And it's been suggested that Giotto probably thought that meteors were angels. Of course, it was a pre-Copernican time, so heaven was very close. And what he observed in seeing showers of meteors was lots of angels coming in from heaven and coming down to earth. And I think there's something rather enchanting about that.
And such an interesting challenge, isn't it, for us as historians to kind of unpick those layers of the literal and the metaphorical and the symbolic in terms of how nature was perceived, but also represented in the past. A really fascinating example. I love the way that this conversation is just evolving beautifully and taking on a life of its own. What I think I'm going to do now, we just have a few minutes left, is I'm going to open up the Padlet so we can all see that. And if anyone would like to comment on anything that we see there, or any of our panelists would like to comment on anything in the Padlet, that would be wonderful, though I'm kind of struggling to find where the Padlet is now. There we are. Right. Can everyone see the Padlet open on my screen at the moment? Wonderful. Okay. Gosh, you know, it's grown so much since I looked at the beginning of the session. And look, there's the Ladybird What to Look For in season books, which are a mainstay of my childhood. I don't know if anyone in the room would like to comment on anything in the Padlet, or if anyone else has a nature memory that you would like to share. If anyone in the panel has something either from your own project that you'd like to point out to us here, or anyone has something that really stands out for them in this growing collection of nature memories. John, I can see you have your hand raised. Thanks.
Oh, sorry, unmuting. Thank you. I really enjoyed seeing. Well, it's all amazing. It's all just beautiful. But I loved noticing the ones where people had found things from urban landscapes and included that. I don't live in a dramatically urban place, but it is suburbs, and we have foxes that are just getting more and more bold every year. And I was thinking just the other day about how 10 years ago thereabouts, then I saw a couple of foxes run across a pavement in front of me in broad daylight and was utterly amazed. Never seen any so close, and they were huge ones as well. And now I still love it whenever I see them, but it's not quite so like out of the ordinary at all. They are around.
Yeah.
And I think it almost sort of links in kind of with the discussion that Nicholas brought up about what is nature, and we to sort of draw this divide between human space and built space and natural space out there. It's useful to remember that that's kind of false, that there's even if you using the sort of the adage about you're only ever 6 feet from a rat in London or whatever, that's nature, isn't it? And also the space beyond the cityscapes is the product of thousands and thousands of years of human activity as well. And so actually the constant interaction between us and other organisms is, I think, it's great.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I love the way that again just kind of reinforces that sense that nature is ordinary. It's not something that has to be in the kind of out in a national park or somewhere that's really wild, but it's all around us, and nature memories are all around us, and they're accessible and they're democratic too. It can be a fox in the supermarket car park just as much as a sighting of a rare bird of prey up in the Highlands. Rock, you have your hand raised.
As a terrible segue, yes, I will say, last time I saw a fox, even though I live quite close to nature, was in central London a couple of years ago. So, yes, there's certainly urban foxes, which, yes, is a reminder that nature, yes. I mean, even though this wall here is built of concrete, you know, where does the concrete come from? Which then goes back to the philosophical discussion that Nicholas was having earlier, which is quite interesting. I will say I was wanting to talk about something else, but then you open up on all these new things that appear on the panel.
Oh no, come on in, Rock. Please share.
At the top right, like at the very, very top of the panel, if you could just scroll back up, just for a nice visual, I saw Northern Lights in Scotland there, which, yes, as an astronomer, yes, I'm very much biased towards enjoying. I had the good luck to actually see them from Northern Ireland here once, but as a matter of fact, last night was a very good night if you were clear skies and as far north as possible to see them as well. So I've seen today, again, outpourings of nature memories, I suppose, exactly, on all over my social media feeds, because I follow people who are interested in these things of Northern Lights, and not just greens, also reds and all sorts of things like that. And in fact, again, that goes back to, you know, modern collections, old collections. In our weather records from the centuries past, we have occasional notes. Yes, bright aurora in the northwest, that sort of thing. These days, you know, we can record images, you can store that sort of thing as well. So but it does still keep a trajectory through the years. By the way, on that note, if anyone, the further north you are, the better. If it's clear again tonight, might have a chance, maybe just with a camera. It's always difficult to predict these things, to have some aurora tonight.
That is wonderful. What a great top tip from Rock. That it's a dream of mine to see the Northern Lights. I'm very envious that you have a lovely how that nature memory in the Padlet, the Northern Lights of Scotland, kind of intersects with memories you've been looking at in your project. But also I like the way that you called attention there to the fact that we're creating a live archive of nature memories on social media, aren't we, all the time? I mean, I shared a memory on here of when I first saw an otter in the wild, which I immediately shared onto Twitter. And it's interesting how that's becoming a kind of ongoing repository where we share these memories. And that's a nice segue into, don't forget, you can share your nature memories in conjunction with History Day with the hashtag nature memories on Twitter as well. I'm really struck by how many of these memories bring together both the natural world and history, but also creative practice. Some wonderful kind of creative responses. We've got the stitching botanicals from People's Collection Wales and the National Botanic Garden of Wales, a wonderful place, and found art shared from holidays. So a really wonderful dimension there. So I think we're coming towards the close of this session, but I would really encourage you to spend time with the wonderful, rich resources here on the Padlet. Add more, it's growing all the time, and I love to think this is a small archive that we're creating as a result of today. So I think at this point, I will start to draw our conversation to a close. First of all, I want to thank our wonderful panel of speakers who've spoken about fascinating and important projects, but also have spoken in such powerful ways and such ethically driven ways, and have given us real kind of manifestos for what history and historical science and environmental history and nature memories can do in our world today. Thank you also to everyone who's got involved with the discussion, everyone who's shared nature memories in the room or on the Padlet or on social media. I wanted to remind you that if you're in London and at Senate House, a wonderful array of exhibitions have been created relating to History Day and environmental history in the Institute of Historical Research, perhaps in Senate House Library as well. Argala can let us know in the chat. So if you are there, do drop in and take a look. And I know my colleague Kate Wilcox in the IHR Library has curated a wonderful exhibition relating to nature memories. So please do keep on sharing to the Padlet and to Twitter with the hashtag nature memories. We're going to end up with a wonderful archive from our collaborative activity today. I wanted to give a quick plug before we end. The IHR is running a couple of online events as part of the Being Human Festival of the Humanities, which are really all about thinking about our places and environments in the future and what our places and environments might be in 2050. Online workshops making future maps and writing future histories of our places as they could be, as we hope they might be in 2050. There's links to those in the chat. So do take a look and join us for one of those workshops if you'd like. If you sign up by Sunday, you'll get a free inspiration goodie bag to have fun with as well. So thank you so much to everyone who's participated today. I hope you'll all join me in thanking our wonderful speakers for sharing their projects and their insights with us today. And thank you for being part of History Day.